There is a lot to be excited about in 2023. Nvidia has launched its 4000 series. We're starting to see them in laptops, and they are smashing records paired with that 13th gen Intel processor. Well, AMD has been talking about its 7000 series, though I have yet to see more of it come up in conversation or in devices for that matter. But it also means that it's a good year to pick up good deals on the outgoing generation, which is actually not that bad. So while I was checking this device out, to my surprise, Legion announced and launched its generation 8 of this device. Usually they don't come out later in the year, but they're already out there. Apparently that device has got fewer features in comparison to this device. Basically what I'm thinking is that this generation 7 might be the last time we see the breed at its best. Now, with previous generation of top tier Legion 7s, you could have like an AMD CPU paired with an Nvidia device, but this time around you've got to pick sides. It's either Intel with Nvidia, or you go with the Advantage Edition, Team Red, with the AMD Ryzen Radeon combo. I've been so bored with Intel and Nvidia being the reigning champs for so long. It is so good that AMD has stuck it out with all of the punches thrown at it, and especially in this really well sorted chassis, I feel like they're starting to show some teeth. It's no longer the riskier and unproven alternative to Intel and Nvidia. Being cheaper than Intel or Nvidia is also no longer its only selling proposition. I mean, sure, they still have a few fine-tuning issues, but hey, I humbly present the 7th generation of the Legion 7 2022 Advantage Edition. Now, before I get into the details, guys, it'd be really great if you could subscribe to me, and towards the end of this video, if you like it, it'd be great if you could click that thumbs up button. Your support will encourage me to continue to spread the message of how cool and how critically important technology and personal computing is. Also, regardless of deals, I respect that this is still going to be a significant investment for you, so I will try to go into a little bit more detail than usual, just so that you have all the information you need to help you decide if this is the right device for you. Now let's do a quick walk around of the specs of this device I have here. It's got the Ryzen 6800H. It's based on the Zen 3 architecture. It's got 8 cores. It is manufactured using the 6 nanometer process, and what that means is that it has a smaller die, and what that means is that it is more efficient compared to, for example, the Intel 12th generation, which is based on the 10 nanometer process. Naturally, that also means that it has a bigger die so that they can fit in more cores on it, but it also means that Intel is going to be generating more heat, although they will also be giving you more performance in comparison to AMD. But essentially, when you pick an AMD processor, when you pick Ryzen, you are picking efficiency, and efficiency means less heat. Efficiency means more time that you can pull out of the battery. The 6800H has a base clock of 3.2 GHz and a turbo frequency of 4.7 GHz. Now you can also configure this device with the Ryzen 9 6900HX, which has the base clock of 3.3 GHz and a turbo frequency of 4.9 GHz. My suggestion is, if you're going to be using this device primarily for gaming, the 6800H has you covered. If you're going to be doing more CPU intensive tasks, then that Ryzen 9 might come in handy. However, if your primary purpose is actually more productivity oriented, or media editing, video, photo editing, then you're actually better off with the Intel processor, because we know on paper that's always going to give you a better result in comparison to AMD. However, it will give you more heat and less battery time. Now, in comparison to the previous generation, the 5800H, the 6800H is about 10% faster. It's not a big jump, but it's not like the 5800 was a slouch. Now, talking about the display on this device, it has a stunning QHD plus display. So that means 2560 by 1600 pixels, or 1600p. Now, if you compare this to a 16:9 aspect ratio, which was a common standard in 2022 and 2021, like up till then, this is going to be rendering 11% more pixels. So if, for example, you want to benchmark against another device, you've got to take that into account. Now, this display can get as bright as 500 nits, and in comparison to my Razer Blade, which can only go up to 300 nits, like, this is obviously noticeably brighter. Especially if you like using your device in like natural light, this is gonna come very much in handy. For example, if you're on a web page without the dark mode on, it's got a lot of white content there, you would have to lower the brightness for it to stop it from giving you a headache. This screen will play the role of a torch if you want it to. This panel has a refresh rate of 165 Hz, and in my opinion, that is more than enough, especially in a QHD format. There are two reasons for that. A lot of games are going to struggle actually to to give you frames up to that refresh rate anyway. B, to the casual gamer, it's really difficult to notice the additional frames even above 144. For the casual gamer, I feel it is difficult to notice the added fluidity even ahead of 144 frames. If you're spending more for say a 240Hz screen, I don't think that's gonna be of much use to you unless you are an esports title enthusiast. You're probably playing games that are slightly older. It also comes equipped with a color calibration tool called X-Rite. Panel has a 3 millisecond response time and covers 100% of sRGB. Now in terms of dynamic range, the display is HDR 400 compliant, which is a fairly entry level standard. So some games recognize it, some games don't recognize it. The display will also go all the way back 180 degrees, and as you can see here, like you could easily open the lid and close the lid with one finger, and the hinge is quite stable, very little wobble to it. Now let's talk a little bit about the GPU inside here. So the unit I have is spec'd with a 6700M. It draws 135 watts of power and has a memory bus of 160 bits and has 10 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory. Now 10 gigabytes of VRAM actually means that there's got lots of room for high resolution textures to make sure your games look sharp. And that's actually a good thing because recent AAA titles actually demand more and more of VRAM. So this might actually stand the test of time in comparison to say a 3070 Ti, which offers 8 gigabytes of VRAM. It's not a big deal, but still it's a nice to have. Now this does come with a mux switch and you can toggle it using Lenovo's Vantage software, but it's not that advanced Optimus thing. Like every time you switch between discrete graphics and like hybrid graphics, which also uses the onboard 680M, you would have to restart your system. So just a minor inconvenience there, I guess. The Nvidia model of the Legion 7 would have advanced Optimus, so you won't have to restart there. You can configure this with the 6850M, which needs about 170 watts of power. What that means is that this chassis right here is actually built for more thermal violence. So the 6700M is sitting pretty chill in this one. Now in terms of storage, it came with a terabyte of a Gen 4 Samsung NVMe drive. You also get another spare M.2 slot, for which I actually got another Samsung 980 Pro just to see like the ease of getting into this device. In terms of opening up the bottom panel, you don't need any special screwdriver like for example the T6 Torx driver you needed for a razor blade. However, you do need a kind of a delicate prying tool because you have to pry out like the rear end of the panel first, so you'll have to be really patient when unclipping all the ends from the back of the panel. So get like a basic iFixit kit before you attempt any of this. But when you do actually get rid of the bottom panel, it's a nice clean sight. Everything seems very well organized, almost as if you could give it like a transparent back cover. It would still look pretty good. Most of the internals are actually covered with a lot of thermal plating, and a lot of it is actually the vapor chamber itself. I also have 16 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM running at 4800 megahertz in this. You can easily swap it out with a 32 gig combo if you need. You'll be able to find it under the metal insert. Like most of the things you want to replace, like the RAM, even the SSDs, they're all under an aluminum cover for better heat dissipation. Again, that's a good mark for Lenovo for thinking it all through. Currently, I have the 22HR build of Windows running on this device. Most of the testing I did with the 22.5.1 Radeon driver, which in my opinion actually gave the best performance of all the drivers I used. Even in comparison to the more recent driver, 22.5 was actually performing the best in games by actually quite a margin. It has an anodized aluminum chassis. That's no big surprise there because a lot of the premium manufacturers actually offer the same sort of material. If you ask what the fuss is about anodized aluminum, basically it means that it's about 3 times harder than the raw material itself and about 60% lighter in comparison to competing sort of metals like copper or steel. It is also way less likely to chip or flake off. The benefits of using this material is the premium feel you get and also like the rigidity you get in the entire chassis in comparison to say a plastic body. However, you can expect it to be slightly heavier in comparison to manufacturers who have been using plastics. Now all of this costed me around 2200 Canadian dollars like a few months ago at some kind of a deal. Now my first reaction looking at this device, minus the Legion etching on the back, it actually looks like a business laptop, doesn't it? It is thinner than the previous generation at 0.76 inches, but when you pick it up, somehow it just feels thick. It feels like an old corporate laptop, although it kind of isn't. I don't know how to explain it. It feels thicker in the hand than it looks. It weighs in at 2.5 kilos or 5.5 pounds. Look at it in the moment. A gaming device? Not likely. Obviously, the lit up Legion logo there is kind of a giveaway. But I think it's actually intentionally part of Legion's design language to provide us discrete, understated power, and it's actually part of its charm. Obviously, when it's switched off, it doesn't look like much, but when you turn it on, well, yeah, it's a whole different story, and there's a lot to it than what meets the eye. Now, it's obvious it has a perky RGB keyboard, which actually has its secondary keys lit as well, which Alienware does not provide, and some other brands actually don't as well. It has a single zone RGB logo back here. Some of the advertisements made me believe that it actually has 2 or 3 zones, but that's not the case, just a single zone there. It has 2 zones in each of its exhausts right here, like 2 at the back, 2 on the left and the right. And then when you look at the chin of this device or the front of this device, this has 10 lighting zones, and it bleeds a little bit onto the sides, about 2 to 3 inches, like just before the keyboard. The previous generation, like the Gen 6, actually had its strip that goes all the way to its exhaust, and this one, it's become a little bit more conservative. And from what I've heard, the Gen 8 actually is more conservative and is only a strip right at the front of the device, no longer going to the sides. I mean, personally, to me, it's not such a big deal to have less RGB on your laptop. Usually, I keep these things turned off in my day-to-day use, but it's just nice to know that it's there if you need it. The logo in Gen 7 also kind of changed a little bit. Now, the O in the Legion is now a pie chart instead of that Y Legion helmet, which actually looked like an upside-down Mercedes logo. If you think about it, maybe they got a letter from them, who knows. Yeah, I actually liked the previous one because in the previous generation the whole logo was not lit. It was just the Y in the middle of the O that got lit, and otherwise the rest of the logo had like this really premium metallic finish to it. I actually preferred the previous one because it was a little bit more discreet. Interesting note, the Gen 8 actually gets rid of RGB in the logo completely. Now, the one thing I did want to point out was that if you're sort of using just the white color on the keyboard like I like using, keep things really simple, it feels like it's using like all 3 RGB colors to produce the white light rather than have like a dedicated LED. You can customize the RGB on this device using Legion's own Vantage software, which is called Spectrum. You actually have all of those settings baked into the BIOS itself, which is actually the nicest feature. And what that means is that as soon as you press the power button, whatever preset that you have saved is going to take over. Usually what happens in a Razer device is that it waits for the device to load up into Windows, and then its Synapse software will actually take over the RGB control, and then it would give you like the preset that you had configured into it. This one has it there all the way from the start. Now you can store 6 profiles or 6 presets in the RGB settings in the Spectrum software, and I don't know if you wanted more, but I feel like 6 is more than enough. And you can cycle through them using the function spacebar key, and you can see it sort of changing around into the different presets that I have preloaded here. This is also obviously taking effect into the back as well. The Spectrum software provides you several effects to choose from and multiple layers on which you can add them on top of each other. For example, to start with the basic, it has a solid color, it has the rainbow wave, it's got the spiral rainbow wave, it's got an audio spectrum with different settings in which you can show like the equalizer on the keyboard as well. Right now what you see is basically it grabbing the color from the screen and reflecting it on the keyboard as well. It also has the visor effect to bounce lights from side to side. It has the typing ripple effect, it's got the rainfall effects, all that you want, all the basic stuff is right there. It doesn't have like more advanced stuff, for example, that Corsair provides, which is contextual lighting, that for example you could configure a key to change color based on the temperature of your CPU or GPU. So I wish it was here as well. Maybe they could introduce it in a later firmware upgrade, but it's not like you need that setting on this anyway because, well, how good its thermals actually are. Another thing that's missing here is like game specific contextual lighting, and this I think is something a little bit special about the Razer. For example, you're playing a game and you're near dying, the keyboard is going to flash red to let you know that you're on lower health, so it provides you information through colors. It also provides you 3 levels of brightness if you use the shortcuts, right? And for me, I thought like 3 is too less because even at the lowest level of brightness, I thought in a dark environment this is still a bit much, but that's not an issue. So actually you can go to the Vantage software and the Spectrum settings as well, so you can see you can just roll the slider down. This actually provides to the Vantage software 10 degrees of brightness that you can control from there. Now, just to talk about the physical aspects of this device just a little bit more, if you look at this device from the side, you can almost notice two parts of this. One is this sort of brushed aluminum band that runs all along this device, giving it a premium feel. And the other part below it is like this tapered part from the sides. It actually gives you an illusion of this device being thinner than it actually is. I think it's an intelligent design decision. Speaking of the sides, ports. Speaking of the ports, and let's start from the back because that's where most of its ports are. Unlike Alienware, this device actually has lit up icons at the top of those ports so that you can easily plug in your peripherals if you want without having to turn this device around. And there you can see it. You can actually light it up. You can actually turn it on and off using the keyboard shortcut. Now, I feel like whoever has ever spoken about a Legion would definitely mention this feature as one of the most important and prominent traits of a Legion, which sadly, from what I understand, has been let go in the upcoming generation 8. So coming back to this generation, you'll find two type A ports, which are version 3.2 Gen 1. Yeah, one of them you can toggle it to be always on if you want to charge your phone, for example. If you're traveling with your device in the back pocket out of it, you can toggle it on and off from the Vantage software. There were 3 USB type A ports in the previous generation, and I think that type C, although becoming more mainstream, a lot of peripherals still don't follow type C, so I think it's always good to have more type A ports. The next generation, as I mentioned, is going to go back to 3 type A ports. It also has a type C port on the back running version 3.2 Gen 2. It also doubles the type C port also doubles as DisplayPort 1.4 and supports 100 watts of charging. Now, if you're not playing games on this and just using it purely for productivity tasks, I tested it with a gallium nitride charger, like a aftermarket 100 watts charger, and it seemed to have supported it perfectly fine. It's only when I used to start like a heavy game on this, the power light on the back, like the plug-in light on this, starts to blink and you would see that it stops charging. There's also an HDMI 2.1 port which can output at 8K at 30 frames a second. It has a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet RJ45 port. The reason why I sort of emphasized on that is because like the next gen 2023 model is supposed to have just a plain gigabit port, and also the port is upside down. Other than that, you'll also find the power input on the side, which is Lenovo's proprietary slim tip jack. Now, although they dropped a type A port from the last generation to this generation, we did get another type C port on this generation, which is on the left side. On the right side, you will find the headphone jack, which I wish was on the left side because I'm a righty, and like sometimes the wire of the headphone sort of interferes with my mouse. You also get a USB-C 3.2 Gen 1 slot on the right. You get an e-shutter switch, which is basically connected to the webcam, so it physically disconnects like the power to the webcam. The website did mention that this device has an SD card reader, but obviously that's not the case, so it doesn't have an SD card reader. However, the Slim 7 version of this generation has an SD card. On the left side, you get 2 additional Type-C ports. One of them is USB 4, which will give you speeds up to 5 gigabytes a second. And then the other Type-C ports is actually version 3.2 Gen 2. The port selection on this device is fairly decent, but it's just one Type A port and one SD card slot less than perfect. The power button actually doubles as a fingerprint reader. This was not the case in the previous generation, and apparently in the next generation that's not going to be a case anymore. Maybe it has facial recognition there, I don't know. But for me personally, I feel like the fingerprint biometric is a pretty convenient way to log into your device in case you have got some sort of lighting issue for you to use facial recognition to log in. The one thing in particular I like about this fingerprint reader is that by the time you switch it on, it actually takes a print at that moment. So when it's done booting up, it actually would log you all the way into Windows. The perforation next to the power button is actually identical to the previous generation. I actually thought it was there for the fans to help pull in air, but that's not the case. The fans don't even pull in air from top of the keyboard as well. I know some diagrams on the website seems to suggest that it's pulling in air from the top of the keyboard, but it doesn't do that. If it was pulling in air from the keyboard, it would have meant like much cooler keyboard zones, but you know what? It doesn't need it. More about the thermal performance on this later, but up front, this device is one of the best thermals that I've used in a while. Silver lining is because it's not pulling in air from the top. When you do connect this device to, for example, your TV and you just want to sit back, play your games using a controller, you can just put the screen down and you won't have to worry about it suffocating itself. Now, trackpad here is a glass precision touchpad, which is obviously nice, though I feel like the click depth is a bit much, and I think the click is also a little bit louder than I'd want it to be. The one thing though that you might be thinking is if that slightly left offset might bother you a little bit. And it's only fair that you might be concerned that it may give you less space for your wrist to rest. I don't think you'll have any issues with that based on my personal experience. It might take a little bit of getting used to, but throughout my typing, even the first time I got this device, when I started to write down like my thoughts and my notes for this review, I got used to it really quickly. Now this can also be a concern for you if you're playing Call of Duty and you might think that your hand might accidentally touch the touchpad and you might shoot off your gun by mistake. But like in my experience, I've played plenty of Call of Duty on this. I never had that problem at all. I actually had that problem plenty of times on my Blade, but on this one never, because this has got excellent palm rejection, and even if you have issues with this, you can simply turn it off using the shortcut key, using the function shortcut key. The Razer in comparison does not even provide you that shortcut to switch it off. Now there are no fancy red, blue, green, rainbow mechanical switches in here, but Legion does provide you a generous 1.5 millimeters of key travel. It does not feel mushy like it does on my Blade, and the signature U shape makes it just more convenient to type on. And I did genuinely feel that my typing accuracy on this was better in comparison to my use of other devices. There's one little thing I found a little bit annoying, that when I did make a mistake while typing on this and when I reached to the backspace key, somehow I had a tendency of pressing the numlock key instead. Because it's just the keypad on the right is just so close to the rest of the keyboard, it can become a little bit confusing, though it's not a big deal, you can get used to it. But yeah, like even speaking about the keypad on the side, it's nice that it's there for those of you number crunchers out there. I did kind of wish that the keypad wasn't there, because that would mean like the keyboard would just be more evenly spaced out, but it's still quite a nice thing to have there, because you can use this keyboard to actually map macros to this, and you can actually do that to the VGN software as well. Now there's also something special about the WASD keys. You do get like these ceramic keycaps out of the box, but more than that, these keys are pressure sensitive. So they're not ones and zeros anymore, they're a variable, like the triggers on your PlayStation controller. So for example, if you're playing Assassin's Creed, the pressure that you use to press the W key will decide if the person is walking or running, and you can use it similarly to configure it in racing games as well. For example, the extent, the pressure with which you press the W key will also decide the extent of accelerator. Personally, I tried to map Forza with this as well, but I just couldn't work out the mechanics of this. Maybe I just need to give it another try and figure it all out. But I did actually reach out to the developers. Software is called Hydra and it's run by Paratech, and they did say that they would work on like a new firmware update for us to map the trigger keys directly to the WSD keys to make like games like Forza more easily to configure. Unfortunately, the bad news is that from what I heard, this feature is no longer going to be available in Gen 8. So this is a one-time only exclusive for the Gen 7. I've had less use for it on my experiences, but it's still pretty unique, and it's nice to see that Legion is trying to innovate and bring us something new and fresh in comparison to the competition. When we talk about the webcam, we also get an upgrade from the previous generation. It's now 1080p, so it provides you much less graininess or the pixelation even when compared to other gaming laptops, even business laptops for that matter. So it's a pretty good camera, provides a pretty good field of view, and it also has got good low light compensation. There's also something special about the webcam this time around, and that is its ability to track your head movement. And that is through what they call the Tobii Horizon experience. That's got multiple use cases, like you can use it to actually look around your environment while playing a video game, for example Flight Simulator. When you turn your head around, you can look around the cockpit, or you can have something that's a bit more productive and use it actually as a privacy filter. So for example, if you're sitting in front of your screen and you look away from the screen and you get distracted, the screen will automatically get blurred out. It will also track your screen time. It will show you like how close you've been sitting to the screen, and it'll give you tips to improve that as well. There's also an advanced privacy filter over here, which is basically that it will only show you the bits on the screen where you're looking at, and the rest of it will remain blurred. And that will basically give you the freedom to work on something confidential even in a public environment. I mean, the implementation of this feature on paper was amazing. Like, that's pretty cool. Sometimes around, I thought the focus of the accuracy bubble was actually not exactly on point. Maybe it was a lighting thing, maybe it needs a better configuration to the whole thing. I don't know. I mean, as a result, I didn't exactly sort of use it in my day-to-day life, but yet you can definitely polish this further and make this into a mainstream feature in the future, although there are not a lot of applications that support Tobii Horizon experience so far. It's a work in progress. So this device came with a 300 watt power brick, which I feel is more than enough to power the 6700M, because you'll also get the 300 watt brick with the 6850M as well. So I did try this with the 230 watt adapter as well, and it seems to be working just fine with that. However, when I'm using this device for VR with the 230 watt adapter, I noticed that the battery charge level was actually still going down despite being plugged in. So like that's a rare circumstance where you would need a 300 watt adapter, I guess. Other than that, if you are playing games on this completely unplugged, just a quick tip, switch this device to silent mode using the function Q shortcut key, because somehow that makes playing games on that setting just smoother. Because if you play it on the balanced setting, there's a lot of frame drops, and I found that was to be the only fix to help me through that. And this is actually good context to talk about the battery. It comes with a 99.9 watt hour battery, which is the biggest you could get in a laptop in order for you to fly with a full charged. And when I was playing, for example, Forza Horizon, like the racing game on this, it lasted for about 2 hours on battery. My settings were maxed out at a QHD resolution, like 40 to like 60 frames, depending on the situation of the game. And if you're going to use this device for productivity with it unplugged, I estimated that I would be getting around 6 hours of battery life with the keyboard at level 1 brightness and the screen at half brightness, not something that's terribly low, so like 300 nits, listening to music in the background, doing a Word document, and like browsing some web pages. With that, I got around 6 hours, which I feel for a gaming laptop is decent enough. Even when taking Red Dead Redemption as an example, it's an old game, but still it's pretty resource heavy. I was getting 30 frames a second when I had the 100 watt charger plugged in, and I had the settings at the quiet mode, and somehow like the battery life was sort of getting sustained at that level. You know how the way these batteries work, like the lower the charge gets, the worse the performance actually gets. Also want to quickly talk about the audio here. It comes with 2 downward firing speakers on the sides, pretty bare bones, but they are tuned by Harman, if that means anything to you. I actually found like the audio on this to be pretty mediocre, like nothing interesting about it, not even that loud, to be honest. Like the bass was also a little bit flat for my taste. I've heard better speakers on a Legion device before. The thing that is worth mentioning is actually the software that is used, which is SteelSeries Dynamic Audio. So they provide you a lot of fun features other than very advanced sort of equalizer settings there in order to set up surround or no surround or speech or no speech or music, like the usual settings that you get on any sort of audio tuning software. You also get the ability to actually pair a Bluetooth speaker with this and use it as a rear channel surround system. You can also throw audio simultaneously at 2 channels together, so like 2 pair of headphones that you can use together, like 2 Bluetooth speakers, 2 Bluetooth headsets that could work simultaneously with this device if you're sort of watching a movie with someone and you don't want to disturb others around you. Now let's get to the good stuff, and I'm really grateful for all of those people who actually got this far into the video. If you've liked my video so far, it'd be great if you could press the thumbs up button, or if you've forgotten to subscribe, click that subscribe button, that'd be great. Like I need to clarify a few things before I get into the detail. I had to play around with the settings quite a bit for me to pull the performance out of it that it has the potential for, and that includes sort of messing around with the drivers, like having the latest drivers or the older ones. For example, I primarily used the 22.5 driver version to get the best performance. At the time when I was benchmarking this, the latest version was the 22.11, and that actually gave me easily like 15 to 20% less performance in comparison to the 22.5. That's a huge difference. And then there's also the hybrid setting, like the muck switch, has to use dedicated GPU or use them both together to get you like better efficiency and better battery life. So for all of the games that I tested on this, all of them were at the QHD plus resolution. I did not use any resolution modifiers. I always kept the scale at 100%, and neither did I use any super sampling techniques like the DLSS version, that's Nvidia's one, or the Fidelity FX one that's available for AMD. And I always maxed out the settings. If there was a preset in a game available for the ultra setting, I used it. At VSync on, those were the kind of settings that I used. If you're going to be comparing this device to another laptop, make sure it's also running on a 16:10 aspect ratio, or at least account for it, because it needs to render 11% more frames in comparison to the 16:9, and that is going to take a performance hit on frames. For my reference, I was sort of comparing this with devices with a 3070 Ti. I had a tendency of comparing this with the MSI Stealth that I had reviewed a while back. The reason for that, it had like a similar amount of thickness, a similar amount of power draw. However, it did not have the 16:10 aspect ratio, or the 16:9 aspect ratio, right? And another thing, like the end performance that we get out of these systems will depend a lot on how the game was developed. There are a few games that will favor AMD, there are a few games that would favor Nvidia, and to be honest, there are more games out there that favor Nvidia because, well, Nvidia has been around for longer, they just got more pull in the gaming community. I also sort of compared it with the Razer Blade at times as well. Comes with an 11800 Intel i7, comes with a 3070 even, not even a 3070 Ti. But I thought it'd be good to see how far we've come from 2 years ago. So I also tried to target games that have their internal benchmarks just to give you a better comparison between these games. So starting off with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which is known to support Nvidia GPUs, I was getting an average of 83 frames a second on the AMD Legion 7. In comparison, the MSI Stealth was actually giving me 99 frames a second and the Razer was actually giving me 81 frames a second. So if anything, like a really marginal difference, but this is just to demonstrate how much the game development process is going to have an effect on the end result. Now, if you look into Horizon Zero Dawn, Sony's game on PC, love that game. I was getting around 80 frames a second on the Legion, about 61 frames a second on my Razer Blade. I think there's a pretty decent difference of 20 frames, but when you compare it to the MSI, that was getting around 74 frames, but it's still about 8% better than the MSI. Now talking about Forza Horizon 5, now this is where the result got sort of interesting. Both the Razer and the MSI were reporting 74 frames a second, like there was no difference between the two. That was really strange. Maybe I need to revisit the benchmark that I did there, but the Legion 7 in comparison was actually giving me 100 frames a second. That's a pretty decent difference. When I even plugged up this device to my TV screen running at 4K with the settings all ultra maxed out, everything else remaining the same, it was still giving me pretty decent frame, like around 60 frames a second on that. So I think that's a pretty good result, because as I mentioned earlier that you can just close the lid and put it next to your TV. I just wanted to emphasize that on a little bit, because this device has the potential of actually also being a console replacement. Just have an HDMI cable ready, plug it in, you have your Xbox adapter into it, you can set up your controllers next to it, and then that's it. It can easily play games for you at 4K, it can handle the load, and you can also close the screen without having the fear of choking it because it's pulling it all its air from underneath it. Now let's talk about Division 2. On Razer, I was getting 54 frames a second, and on the MSI, it bumped up to about 58 frames a second, and finally on the AMD, I was getting 66 frames. This is about a 13.8% bump in performance. Far Cry 6. This is where AMD goes a little bit behind as well. So on the Razer Blade, I was getting 64 frames a second. On the MSI, I was getting 79 frames a second. So that generation leap with the Ti and the 12th generation, good enough. And on AMD, the result I got for this device was actually the same as a Blade, 64 frames a second. And that's outright terrible. Even at 64 frames in isolation, forget the benchmarks, I think it's a very acceptable sort of result for you to enjoy a story-driven game. I also tested Red Dead Redemption 2 on this, and that tends to favor AMD, but I feel like the results are not really comparable because preset in the game does not exactly reflect well on the detailed settings, and like one has to really manually change the settings one by one on that. So I don't know if I can compare like by like, but with the settings maxed out, advanced settings all maxed out at QHD plus resolution, what I see here is that I was getting 51 frames a second on this device compared to 43 on the Razer and then 52 on my MSI. Now that on paper doesn't sound like a lot, but RDR2 is a very demanding game. I think the results are not very reliable to compare to the others just because of the way you need to manually change all of the quality settings on the graphics. As a story-driven game, I know it's below 60 frames, but it's still a very playable game on this. Assassin's Creed Odyssey. The Razer Blade was giving me 42 frames a second. This was up to 50 frames a second on my MSI. And then on the Legion, I was getting 64 frames a second. So that's a pretty substantial bump at 28%. Gears of War. Razer and MSI were both giving like roughly about 65 frames a second. And then there was a similar result for the Legion 7 at 68 frames a second. Kind of interesting. Then we talk about Guardians of the Galaxy, right? It also has a benchmark, surprisingly. And on the Razer, I was getting 71 frames a second. MSI, 88 frames a second. So like a moderate sort of a jump. And then on the Legion, leading again by 28% at 113 frames a second. Not so sure how that happened. Maybe I should recheck that. If we talk about 3D Mark Timespy, and this is obviously one of the tests in which it would level the field quite a bit, at least in terms of raw performance. I do want to talk specifically about this because the Timespy test for the Razer gave me a score of 7,189. On the MSI, I got a score of 8,760, and on the Legion, 5 digits, I got 10,704 points. So that's a respectable lead of 22%, quite a decent score. Talking about Cyberpunk 2077, it's been a while since it was released, I'd imagine that there are a lot of improvements in terms of the game itself. Razer was giving me 44 frames a second, MSI at 50 frames a second, and the Legion was falling behind. This is on the ultra setting without the ray tracing, all of the sort of things turned off. I've also not used the ray tracing setting in any of these games. Maybe an unpopular sort of an opinion, but I barely get to notice the effects of ray tracing turned on or off. So it's not worth the added strain on a GPU anyway. And also, obviously, we understand that AMD is not so good at ray tracing right now. They're getting much better, especially with their 7000 series. They've given a really good result, but for now, I've not used ray tracing just so that we can compare sort of like with like. Ghostrecon Breakpoint I only tested on the Legion and I was getting 88 frames a second, maxed out settings. Rainbow Six Extraction, I was getting 86 frames a second. God of War, on average I was getting like 55 frames a second. I especially enjoyed playing Modern Warfare on this. I was getting about roughly 110 frames to 120 frames. But what I really did like that AMD has a setting for like sharpening of textures a little bit more from its setting menu in comparison to the MSI with the 12th gen Intel and the 3070 Ti. I was also getting very similar results, again 110 120 frames a second. Spider-Man, the latest one, like the remastered version on PC, it was giving me roughly around 83 frames a second. Flight Simulator. So I did connect the Flight Simulator to a QHD ultra wide display that you see behind me. It's currently switched off. With a resolution of 3440 by 1440 pixels on high settings, and I was getting near about 60 frames, so that's pretty decent. And also, hey, I obviously had to test like the latest Modern Warfare 2 as well, with the setting maxed out, QHD, the whole like everything right up to its maximum thing, texture setting to its absolute maximum. I was getting an average of 75 frames. I was hoping I should get more, honestly. Even when I started to play around with like the FSR setting, I could barely tell like the image was being upscaled from a low resolution. Like the tech is pretty smart and pretty unique, obviously. So if you turn that setting on, I was getting easily north of 120 frames a second, right? So when playing multiplayer, you can sort of switch that setting on just so that you can take advantage of those added frames. It works. And when you're playing single player, you just want to enjoy those added crisp details in the game. Switch all of those FSR settings off. I obviously also have to talk about one of the most anticipated games for 2023, which was Hogwarts Legacy. It's a fairly decent looking game, but I think that it could have looked slightly better considering it's a 2023 game. But I was getting roughly around 100 frames a second. Again, QHD plus, everything maxed out. But if I could compare it to the Razer Blade, obviously it's an unfair comparison. It's like 2 generations old, but I was getting 60 frames a second there. So that's a humongous leap. There was a sad realization during my testing because I started to play Uncharted while the game looked really good. Well, I believe the performance was quite good. I'm sure I was getting lots and lots of frames, but it does not matter because the game kept on crashing on this AMD device. There was a quick fix to it that I just downgraded the GPU driver to 22.5, which is the driver in which I was getting the best performance, and apparently it's the most stable as well. But I still thought kind of gimmicky, kind of a sad fix for you to go around sort of tinkering around with the settings just for a game to run. So during the test of these games, benchmarking them one after the other, I recognized that I was doing it like for 3-4 hours straight. I thought like the keyboard should become a little bit warm to the touch now, right? But that actually wasn't the case. This device remained actually pretty cool throughout all of my testing, throughout all of the games, regardless of how long I played it. This device is meant to stand the test of time, right? It's going to stay with you for a while. It's going to be a reliable device. I would say that these thermals would especially become useful if you're living in a region where ambient temperatures tend to be higher. At a level playing field, I honestly felt like this GPU and the 6700M had the raw power to rival or exceed the 3070 Ti easily. Usually an AMD device, these Advantage Edition devices would always be cheaper than the Intel. It could be maybe $100 in certain instances, but it could be even like $300 to $400. Also, just another quick thought in terms of thermal management. Usually when I'm playing a game, I would keep something underneath to lift like the back a little bit, even if it is by an inch. Testing games on this for like 3-4 hours long straight back to back. The temps on this reached total about 76 degrees. But when I raise the device from the back, like about even an inch, I remember the temps dropped to about 71 degrees, and that's a pretty substantial drop. Now let's just take AMD out of the picture for a second and let's talk about Lenovo Legion on its own. And the reason why I tend to be drawn to it more than I'm drawn to other manufacturers, I think Legion is one of the few brands which is still listening to their consumers, which is still listening to us, the customers. And I'll give you a few examples about it, right? So on this device, you'll see the function key at the bottom left next to the control key. And it might happen that you're editing a document and you want to copy paste something and you reach out to the control key and you accidentally press the function key and the C key and nothing happens. It's annoying, right? But in this one, even if you press the function key by mistake and the C key with it, it would still perform the copy paste function. Even when you're using the function keys on top, usually they would have like the default functions and then you'll have to use the function keys to use like the media secondary functions. But here you can quickly switch between them. You just press function and escape to make the media controls the default setting of those keys. And you'll even see like a little light turn on there just to let you know that you're either in like the media default setting or in the function key default setting. You want to change the refresh rate just to save battery? No problem. You press the function R key and you can easily switch between 165 Hz and 60 Hz on the go. No problem. You suddenly feel like being discreet, you want to turn off the logo light, no problem. You can just quickly do it by the function L key. You have that gone. You want to turn off the lights on the rear ports, no problem. You can turn it on and off using the function U key. It even has a great battery conservation feature that you can access easily using the Vantage software. And what it does is that it limits the charge to 70% so that it doesn't overcharge and the life of your battery is protected. This is particularly for those people who like to keep their devices just plugged in all the time. On the other side, you have a rapid charge feature on this as well. For those people who use this device mostly on batteries, if you want to quickly charge it up before you head out, you can do so with that feature. It charges the device from 0 to 70% in 30 minutes. In my experience, when I charged it up from like 12% to 100% using the rapid charge mode, it took about less than an hour to charge from 12% to a full 100% under that rapid charge setting. It naturally slows down after 70% to stop the battery from overheating. You can also even monitor the temps of the battery itself in the Vantage software. They even chiseled down the sides of this device that may have been an inconvenience because of that added aluminum band. They thought about it, right? They wanted you to be comfortable when using this device. They're thinking about you. And because they chiseled the sides down, they recognize that it may become a little bit difficult to lift up the lid. So they added a little lip on this side so that you can easily raise it up as well. Even from a device maintenance point of view, Legion has gone through the trouble of listing each and every individual component of this device along with pictures. You can easily access it from their website so that you can visually identify them to help you in your troubleshooting. Or if you're looking for substitute sort of products to that certain component of your device, it's all there. Speaking about the Vantage software that is unique to Lenovo and to Legion, it's just such a simple, straightforward, easy to use software which has everything all in one place. You want your updates, it's all there. You want to configure your device, it's there. RGB, you want to have a hardware run, it's all there inside of it. You want to check your warranty, everything's under one house. Whatever you want, it's there. You want to switch on your hybrid mode on or off. You want to enable the setting which closes other applications when you run a game. Even when it comes to warranty, if you're troubleshooting something, you have a question, you've got so many means to actually reach out to them. You can call them, you can chat with them, you can email them, whatever you want, it's there, and they're very responsive. Although I've had the occasional encounter in which when I was speaking to someone, they were not very technically sound and they were actually sort of reading through their own manuals to respond to my query. It's kind of sad, but you would get your answers eventually. Another really interesting in this Vantage software is this self-diagnostic feature. It does a health check of all of the individual components, and this shows the obsession that Legion has in terms of listening to its customer and giving them what they need to understand their system and just completely unleash their full geekery at whatever level that they want to. Because even when you're running the self-diagnostic, what you'll see in front of you is like a series of command prompts just giving you some gibberish, but it actually gives you the option to sort of learn about what each test was about and how to interpret the results that come out of it. That's amazing. Most of you won't even care about something like that, but what you need to understand is how much Legion has gone out of their way to give you a good user experience, even when it comes to back-end diagnostic work. It's not like Legion is only trying to give you like the best quality product in terms of function, they're also trying to innovate. Now take the force-sensitive WASD keys for example. It's actually quite unique. Even the Tobii Horizon experience, that is unique. And they have it here in this device because they're trying to test out new things that we might appreciate and we might sort of adopt down the line. So, conclusion. AMD and Legion put together, this is a reliable, powerful, feature-packed, exquisitely built laptop, and it comes with great customer support, and it even offers you great value for money in comparison to competition. Like, what more can you possibly want? I do apologize for the long video, but I hope that you now know everything that you need to know to make a decision about purchasing this device. If you found what I shared with you useful, it'd be great if you could subscribe and like. Yep, that's about it. Thank you for watching. See you next time.